I hope everyone enjoyed some further frank exchanges and good conversations in the spirit of openness that our earlier panels offered. It's my pleasure to introduce not the next panel, but the person introducing the next panel, a very good friend for several decades, the president of the Canadian Council of the Americas, who's here to offer a few remarks about the importance of Latin America for our conversations today vis-a-vis the Indo-Pacific. So, without further ado, Ken Frankel, President of the Canadian Council for the Americas.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you and such distinguished panelists. First, I want to start by thanking Carlo and his very excellent team for inviting the Canadian Council for the Americas to collaborate on the visioning and structuring of this panel. The timing of this panel could not be more opportune. As we all know, the world is evolving in ways yet to a resting place still to be determined, if at all. What we know is that the old rules are gone or deeply wounded. New paradigms may arise. Strong-arm transactionalism in trade, security, and other matters has gained unabashed adherents and practitioners. This dynamic is playing out in Latin America before our eyes, manifested most clearly in the competition between China and the United States, both of which are and will continue to be outsized, but not exclusive external actors in the region. To maneuver and prosper in this new reality, Canada needs new and strengthened relationships. The Canadian Council for the Americas believes that Latin America offers the best opportunities for Canada to do that. It also needs a new and completely reimagined strategy. To that end, tomorrow, the Canadian Council for the Americas will release its 55-page strategy paper that outlines how Canada can accelerate growth across the Americas by leveraging opportunities in infrastructure build, resource development, shared labor strategies, and enhancing security. Carlo and one of our panelists today, Eric Miller, were important contributors to this project. It was chaired by Dr. Janice Stein, the head of the Monk School at the University of Toronto. For those who are interested in attending, I invite you to do so, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Chateau Laurier next door. The panel today is particularly timely and is to an extent an extension of our strategy report. Canadian policy writ large vis-a-vis China must take into account Chinese engagement in this hemisphere. Two things are clear. One, China's significant and growing presence in the region will not subside. It is only growing. And two, Canada has long-standing interests and sizable opportunities in the very same region. The panel's exploration of how these two facts can cohabit is an important step forward in helping us understand how Canada can operate in this new reality. It's now my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to Evan Dyer of CBC. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ken. Thanks very much. Well, let's start by introducing our panelists for today, and I'll start here on the left. We have Eric Miller of the Rideau Potomac Strategy Group, joining us visiting from Washington, also a board member of the Canadian Council for the Americas. We next have Tatiana Palermo, former trade negotiator for the Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture and also former executive secretary of the Brazilian Presidency. And on my left, Omar Narea, visiting from Lima, Peru, a researcher for the Center for China and Asia-Pacific Studies from the Universidad del Pacífico. And I believe we have also visiting us on the screen from Rio de Janeiro, Claudia Trevisan, Executive Director of the Brazil-China Business Council. So the topic is China, Latin America, and Canada, but also just generally the Indo-Pacific region. So if you have thoughts on countries other than China, please feel free to share them with us. And I guess we would just start with a kind of a rapid fire round of everybody's big picture thoughts on the state of that relationship right now. We'll start at the left with you, Eric. What stands out to you right now about what's happening between China and Latin America?
Well, certainly, thank you very much for the invitation. Certainly what you see is China is growing in its interest and its participation in a whole variety of areas in Latin America, from the building of the now famous Chancay port in Peru to its major purchases of soybeans from Brazil, which was done in many ways to offset the volumes that they used to get from the United States. China has also invested in parts of the Americas that perhaps have gotten less attention, like Jamaica, for example. One of the great people wonder how China got such a strong position in critical minerals. Well, when the bauxite mine in Jamaica a decade ago went bankrupt, China stepped in and bought it. And so China has been willing to go to every part of the region and to engage in business in the context of the region. It's not particularly given over to making moralistic statements. It brings capital, it brings expertise. Certainly in things such as mining, there have been very important areas of pushback, really serious conflicts with local communities, for example, but China is a big and growing presence, and that will continue for the foreseeable future.
Actually, I drove on the new Chinese road in Jamaica from St. Anne's Parish to Kingston just before they opened the toll booths. It's to be a road where China will collect the tolls for the first 30 years and then hand it over to the government of Jamaica. And we had a rainstorm, and actually one lane of the road collapsed before they even opened the toll booths. So that was not very encouraging for the next 3 decades. Yeah, oops. Tatiana, your thoughts.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with all of you. I'm here in my own capacity. I'm not representing the company I work for. Today, I was Brazil's negotiator, as you said, agricultural trade negotiator 10 years ago. And based on that experience, Carlo and I, and Sharon also from their then Canada West Foundation, we actually worked on a study on how negotiate with China for agriculture. And there were a few other negotiators participating from New Zealand, I think. And it's still, I think it's published. You can all read about this. It was difficult to negotiate with China, but so was difficult to negotiate with India, with Japan. Those were really tough negotiations. South Korea as well, present here earlier. So we can talk a lot about those negotiations for many hours, but I would like to go back to your question, Evan, about the investments and about what Eric has just told us. There is a perceived huge presence of China in Latin America. And I say perceived because in terms of investments, it's different from trade. Of course, most of the countries in the region, they heavily rely on China, and it's not healthy. I've been telling Brazil for many years back when I was with the government, we needed to diversify because for soybeans, it's 75%, for example, for soybeans, more than 60% for beef, et cetera, et cetera. So it was unhealthy then. And now it's even more unhealthy. And while China is the market for most of the countries, the US is the investor. And when we look at the facts, at the data, And I would advise you to look at the ECLAC, the European Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, latest report published in July. We can see the real participation of the countries in the foreign direct investments in Latin America. And the numbers are completely different. 38% the US, 24% Europe, European Union and other European countries, 5% Canada, 2% China. And I will repeat, 5% Canada and 2% China. And then ECLAC says, okay, there are other numbers and other participations like concessions, and we have a lot of participation in concessions, energy, etc., infrastructure. We have other construction contracts. We have asset purchases, but it's nothing compared to the US and Europe. So keep this in mind for our future discussion. It's the market, it's not the investor.
So, Omar, you come from a country which has seen China spend a lot of money recently, a city, in fact, which has seen a really big investment. So what's your impression?
Yeah, first, thank you for the invitation. I feel really comfortable. This is my first time in Canada. The flag is very familiar for me. I want to say, Tatiana is making a very important point. I want to say this, Canada invests more in Peru than China. So you have to take this data in particular because you have to be focused on which kind of investment. You know, this is mineral, this is a particular country in a part of South America. There are differences between coasts, actually. If you see the West Coast, like Brazil, the East Coast, Brazil, Argentina, then you have to split the knowledge regarding what happened in the West, like Chile or Peru. But the story, short story is after the commodity booms in 2004, Latin American countries face really macroeconomic unstable equilibrium. So they have to realize this situation to open to the economies. And the truth is that not many countries make this work, like Venezuela, for instance, depending on the oil prices, or even Argentina. Brazil, I think Tatiana is going to tell this story in very good position, but they make this deal with the soybean, which still is a big challenge and fragility in terms of commodity boom, prices, etc. But in the case of Chile and Peru, who are also a lot of exporting copper, they make this switch to agriculture, especially for fruits or agriculture with add value, you know, kind of cold change. But they don't went to Asia at first instance. They went to Europe, the United States. So they start to compete. So if you put together Ecuador, Chile, Peru agriculture for fruits, they are in the same position that the number one country exporting fruit, the States. You know, so this, my first idea is, yes, you need to understand China as a long relationship with South America, but that is also regarding what sector you are involved.
Let's go to Rio for Claudia. Claudia, what are your thoughts on the big picture of China from your Brazilian perspective?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Carlo, and the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to share the panel with Ivan, Tatiana, Omar, and Eric. I will start with an overview of trade and investment. And I think it's not very helpful to talk about Latin America as a whole, because we have a very different situation in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean, and South America regarding the relationship with China and the United States. When you consider the region as a whole, the United States is its main trading partner, followed by China. But when we look only for South American countries, the scenario is different because the data of Central America is very much influenced by the strong links of Mexico with the United States that give a disproportional participation of Mexico in the Latin America data. And in South America, the main trading partner is China. And China's share in exports and imports in the region is a bit more than 20%, 23%. And the United States comes in second with roughly 15%. And China is the main trading partner of 4 countries in South America: Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Peru, and the second largest trading partner of other 5, which is Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And the United States is the largest trading partner of 4 countries: Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, and Venezuela, and the second largest trading partner of other 3, Brazil, Chile, and Peru. And Brazil has also a relatively strong position and is the largest trading partner of 3 countries, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and the second largest trading partner of another one, which is Bolivia. And I think it's useful to have the same analysis in terms of investments. Chinese presence in terms of investments is much more pronounced in South America than in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. I use a database that's called China Global Investment Tracker. That is a database from the American Heritage Foundation, that instead of looking at the official numbers that the central banks of each country give about the origin of foreign investments, they track all investment that China made all over the world. And I think they give a more realistic picture of China's presence, because many of the China investments is made through fiscal paradise or for third countries, not necessarily coming from China. And what this database shows is that China stock in South America is roughly a little bit more than 160 billion US dollars. And to give you an idea of scale, the Chinese investments in Mexico, they estimated at 12 billion US dollars. And Brazil is the main destination of Chinese investments in the region, with a stock of 78 billion US dollars. And the Chinese investments in Brazil are mainly concentrated in electricity and oil exploration. These 2 sectors have received 70% of Chinese investments in Brazil. And globally, Brazil is in a very strong position as a destination of Chinese investments. Brazil is in 4th place, is the emerging country that receives most Chinese investments, and is behind in terms of stock of investments. This database, they have numbers since 2005. So in terms of stock of investments, Brazil is number 4 behind the United States, the UK, and Australia. And another thing that I'd like to point is that 9 of the 12 South American countries are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Brazil is not one of them. Brazil is not part of BRI. And so I think there are strong trade and investment ties between South America and China. And in general, these ties have led leaders in the region to adopt a pragmatic approach in their relations with China, even when their rhetoric is more critical towards the country. And we are seeing a situation now, a change in Argentina, with the United States conditioning the financial aid that FME approved to Argentina to a change in the relationship of the country with China. And the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, said that the US wants Argentina to take China out of the country. So let's see how this play out.
That's interesting that you just mentioned that. And of course, I guess a lot of people will have noticed how China's buying of Argentina's soybean crop following the U.S. bailout actually became an issue for a little while in U.S. domestic politics. And I'm just wondering what you guys think would be some of the big events or trends, developments that you would point at on the trade and investment front in recent times, or political developments between Latin America and China, the ones that stand out for you or that really tell us something about bigger things that are happening. And I throw this open to anyone.
There we go. So I think one of the things that's going to be essential to watch is what happens in the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, or USMCA. Will there be formal restrictions on Chinese investment, particularly from Mexico? And will those products receive originating treatment within the North American trade framework? There have been a number of members of Congress who've written to Mexico raising concerns about the volumes of Chinese investment in Mexico. In fact, the second to last time I was in Mexico, I was at a closed-door event, and there was a consultancy that had calculated some numbers, and they and the Undersecretary for Investment got into a very serious discussion because the Mexican government numbers look lower than what some of the other estimates are. So this is going to be really important because it's the question of what is China's participation in Mexican and North American supply chains going to look like. And I think this is going to be an absolutely fundamental point going forward. And certainly you mentioned Argentina and what happens with Secretary Bessent and so on. I mean, you are now seeing a no-holds-barred, full-on contest where the Trump administration is seeking to move Argentina very much back into the U.S. camp, and it conditioned its bailout not only on breaking ties with China, but it also conditioned its bailout on the results of the election. And so there is a great deal of conditionality which is going into this, but this is all part of the U.S. strategy to try to reassert its position in a country that, frankly, over the years has had a somewhat complicated relationship with the U.S.
I think a lot is happening in the region. The region is extremely important for the U.S. for critical minerals, for example, right? In Brazil has one of the largest reserves, for example, 18% of reserves, global reserves, but it doesn't produce anything or almost anything, right? And I'm looking at Eric because he's a specialist in the mining and the minerals. I'm more a specialist in agriculture, but I read about everything. And so we have this kind of strategic positioning of the region because of the critical minerals and energy in general. And you mentioned Argentina. We have a political shift in the region as well. First was with the Argentine elections. Then we will soon have the results of the elections in Chile, right? We had Bolivia, a more centered candidate. We will have elections in Peru and Colombia. We also have a situation, a military situation, a war the war on drugs, right, that is affecting the region heavily. Venezuela, Colombia, with some possible strikes, even having said. And we also have the war on drugs also in Mexico and within this USMCA or CUSMA, as you call it, negotiations. And going back to the USMCA, we see a lot of talks about maybe separating into bilateral agreements, which is a huge risk. Rules of origin, the regulations on affiliated entities in the U.S., right, for export controls and more controls over the presence of China and other sanctioned economies within the supply chain in the region, right? But then before we hear from the other speakers, we have, Claudia was really right about mentioning different situations in the southern cone, Mercosur, and the rest of Latin America. Mercosur hasn't been really integrated in the global trade, has only a few agreements, while the Pacific Alliance, Mexico, have the most agreements with the world, right? So the impact of the whole globalization and now the US measures is kind of limited in Brazil. We talked about this yesterday. Even the impact of the tariffs, which is indeed impacting critical sectors like beef, coffee, for Brazil, extremely important, but still it only affects 43% of trade, and for agriculture it was, I think, it was around 7% of the whole agricultural exports of Brazil. So quite less impact than, for example, on other economies in the region. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to talk a bit about the Chancay port, and it's related with what my colleague said. It's true that Mexico, Chile, Peru are more tied with the international economy. That's why the Latin American port network has been evolving in the last 10 years with a particular role of Peru. That's why we wanted to evolve to our new kind of hub port towards Asia Pacific. At the initial, it was a Peruvian port project, but later, in the years of Belt and Road Initiative, 2019, Costco Shipping wanted to invest in the port and change the dimension of this project from a port to the Peruvian capacity to try this as a hub for the whole South American West Coast to link to it to Asia, you know, and this is a result again of the development of the trade sector in these countries. Chile is really evolving into the Asia-Pacific markets. Peru is still very concentrated in copper, you know. So I think it's very important to make this split the meaning of exporting copper than another kind of agricultural products, because this is also important, in my opinion, for Canada as well, you know, because the world is demanding and crazy for, you know, avocados, blueberries, and they need, you know, this product as much sometimes as this commodity food, you know. So that increased the pressure of new cities in East Asia demanding these products. And another important point is that the velocity of this kind of investment. No one noticed this project 3 years ago. I belong to a center to Asia Pacific. The last year, they start to ring every day to ask what's going on. You know, we want to see if it's real that the Belt and Road Initiative is extending beyond West and East country to reach the far, far South America. And they start to visit Chancay. And they realized that, oh, the project is actually ongoing. The project actually was inaugurated with the presence of the Xi president in the APEC meeting. And now it's happening 1 year from the inauguration. and the amount of trade that Peruvian trade that has moved the port is $1.8 billion, which surpass the amount of investment of the project, which is $1.4 billion. So it means that you need to take into account what is going on, not because it's a Chinese project, but because it's belonging to a trend of interchange between Asia and this faraway region of South America.
So one of the things I think that is implied here that's really fundamental is that it depends what you have your surplus with. Tatiana is completely right that China is the market. But if you are producing vast quantities of soybeans, that's a very difficult thing to redirect if China takes trade action against it. Canada knows that on canola very well. Whereas if you're Chile and you're a great producer of copper, there is a vast demand for copper globally. So China can essentially say, I don't want to take the copper, and you can say, fine, I've got 20 other countries who will take that copper. And so as you look at the trade dynamics, you also need to look at the risks of reversals of market access and what that looks like. And in some respects, what you're producing, it really matters greatly in terms of how comfortable you feel.
What are your thoughts on what us and them, essentially, about the trading with the United States and getting U.S. investment or getting it from China? You can't have both. Do you think that we're going to see more of that? And talk a little bit about the trade-off between those kinds of pressures and sovereignty.
I mean, look, this is great power politics. The U.S. has said the same thing in Southeast Asia, all over the place. And China has said the same thing. I mean, there were, I remember when Papua New Guinea hosted APEC, there were people who told me about very ugly scenes with the Chinese government in upbraiding the PNG government. And so this is what great powers do. The great powers are looking at allies and blocs and so on. And the challenge, if you're not a great power, is how do you navigate? And so what's happening in Latin America is exactly what's happening in Asia, which is looking to navigate between the powers. People in the region know that the U.S. is the largest investor. They don't want to put that at risk. It's the same case in Malaysia, for example. The U.S. is the largest investor, but China is the largest market. And so countries learn how to say I love you to many different types of people.
And thank you.
Yeah, I love you and thank you. Te amo. But this is what they're trying to do, because ultimately nobody wants to have to choose. And there are some countries who are perhaps closer to one grouping versus another, but everybody wants more investment and everybody wants more trade. And so that's the game.
May I continue this? President Trump, I think, used a few times the new term G2, right? The U.S. and China, they can afford it, right? To have a strong, political will, right, in negotiating with the countries. And China, well, you have to know China. China is still, a planned economy. And having been born and raised in Russia, I can, reflect a lot on this, how China actually manages its purchases of everything. They are all done by, huge state-owned or state-influenced corporations. Still MOFCOM, the Ministry of Trade of Commerce of China, authorizes all the largest transactions in every single sector, and there are lots of controls in place. So it's a managed, in a certain way, trade with everyone, right? China, when I was negotiating with China, had always this list of concerns that they would act upon the concerns if you did something. There was a weed in Brazilian soybeans. There was no weed in soybeans, but it was in the list. And whatever we would do, you know, they would do something to you know, like retaliate, or it took us time to, for example, authorize exports of corn to China back then, and lots of other things. And I can also echo what Claire said from the Canada Meat Council. It's mostly not about tariffs. It's mostly in the agricultural trade. It's about the non-tariff restrictions, right? So Argentina, just going back to Argentina, where you lived, right, Evan? So Argentina has just signed a framework agreement with the U.S. There are several tariff concessions. There are several things that they agreed on, and this could challenge the rules within Mercosur. We see a lot of, you know, like coming potential tensions there. And we also see Brazil kind of navigating, playing with this idea of being the leader of the global South. Remember, they invented the term the global South. And when we look at the BRICS, this dysfunctional coalition, I would say, because it's not a trade coalition, but then they don't have a real, you know, like political alignment there. There are the major economies there, emerging economies, right? Brazil, Russia, India. And now they have Iran, okay? Before Iran, it was something. Now they have Iran. And so it's kind of, I would say, I'm expressing my personal views here, right, in my own capacity. So playing with fire in general. It's one thing to have this strategic neutrality, and the other thing is, you know, aligning with Iran and with Russia, yeah? So it's a kind of a different structure nowadays.
Claudia, do you have any thoughts on that, us versus them? Or the desire to force countries to trade and take investment predominantly from one country and exclude the other?
This question for me. Yes, I think, like Eric mentioned, I think in South America, no country wants to choose between China and the United States. We have, in the case of Brazil, we have very strong relationships with the United States, no historical relationship. The United States is a very big investor in Brazil. We have a strong connection in capital markets, financial markets with the United States. But China is also a very important partner. It's not only the main destination of Brazil exports. Brazil exports to China represent almost 30% of Brazil's total exports to the world. And the participation of the United States, which is our second trading partner, is around 12%. And there is one other aspect of the relationship between Brazil and China that makes it more important, is the fact that Brazil is one of the few countries in the world that has a trade surplus with China. In recent years, the Brazil trade surplus with China represented more than 50% of Brazil's trade surplus with the whole world. In the last 10 years, Brazil accumulated a trade surplus with China of 300 billion US dollars, which was crucial to the increase of foreign exchange reserves in Brazil. And going back to the main changes that I see in the region, I think the position, one very important issue is the position of the United States, and this more the changing in U.S. Position regarding Latin America. Now, the new Trump government is showing a much more willing to act in Latin America as the first Trump government. So you're going to see what it will mean for the regional relationship with China. And I'd like just to complement what Omar said about the Shanghai port. I think it's a very important innovation, a very important new thing in the relationship that will increase the role of Asia even more in trade relations of the region. And Asia is already a very important region, and the Shanghai port will reduce the direct shipping time from Peru to China from 33 to 23 days. So it will make the region's products, not only in China, but in Asia as a whole, more competitive. And just to finish, in the short to the medium term, Brazil will not benefit from the Shanghai port because we don't have land connection with the port. But there are a lot of discussions about the feasibility of building a bioceanic railway connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific. But it's something that is far in the future.
So let's talk then a little bit about the Belt and Road Initiative. And Chunky Port is actually formerly part of that, I understand, right? But there's also projects that are not technically BRI, but they are BRI-like projects. I'm wondering if Omar, if you could just walk us through some of these big projects that we're seeing in Latin America in recent times.
Yeah, I think it's important to notice this idea that Belt and Road as an international led by the She President initiative started in 2013, but in Latin America, actually the first project started in 2018, like 5 years later, and they kind of rebrand some projects to use it on this new framework. It means like you have to take into account that there is already ongoing projects regarding China and Latin American countries before Belt and Road. And in those years, they used this financial capacity of Chinese banks to lend or to bank these projects. So in my opinion, you have to analyze base by base each project, because some are to the government, some of them are for private sector, like Shanghai Port. So, but important is that the Belt and Road Initiative make a kind of very strong network to improve the trade of China worldwide, no? Beyond Western countries. So that's what opened the chances of Latin American countries to go to Asia in a more competitive way. And I think it's important to understand that also it's not only investment, it's also the commercial goals of the company. Shanghai is run not only by COSCO Shipping Port, it's also run by COSCO Shipping, which means that the port gives a number of maritime routes in commercial terms week by week. So that's why they make in terms of commercial approach. And what I've seen is that not only Peru is well connected now, even the south of South America, like Chile. And that's why Claudia said, like, Brazil is looking for some Pacific way through Shanghai networks. I am trying to analyze the role of the new Amazon in this context. And the truth is that you have Acre region very close to Peru, so that will take advantage. Later you have Rondonia, which is not too close. But then you have Mato Grosso, where export, I think, 30 million, you know. And you don't have to take only the view of this is an export market, but this is also an import market. Actually, the main supply of Mato Grosso is Canada. Canada export potassium to Mato Grosso, which means that these fertilizers, even beyond Russia, and using this long route that Claudia said, like it takes 40 days, you know. But now you will have eventually, if the route, the logistic will improve, a better position. So the impact is not only in terms of, okay, this Chile country, this is Brazilian country or Peruvian country. I think Belt and Road example that it's opened new doors to China.
So does this network pose a threat of competition to Canada's exports, to Canadian hopes in the region and plans to export to Asia?
I don't think so. Because of the Brazil until lately, Claudia, correct me if I'm wrong, but Brazil is not participating in the BRI in any capacity, and the government was extremely cautious through all the latest administrations not to participate in this. China is really being strategic about access to maritime transportation, right? And we see a lot of happening, a lot of tensions over the global maritime transportation happening. I don't think this specifically threatens China's investments or other countries' investments in the region, threatening Canada. I think what's important for Canada is to look at the region and prioritize some of the negotiations. Canada-Mercosur agreement, many years, probably a decade, right? And if you look at the USMCA, what is the most, sensitive sector that the US always complains with Canada? Dairy sector, right? So it's always, we look at the agreements as a, as a threat to our agricultural sectors. And when I started my mandate with the Minister of Agriculture of Brazil, I said, it's a two-way street. We need to ask our partners, what do they need from us for us to get something from them? And dairy sector, for example, for Brazil, it's been one of the most sensitive ones. Probably it's cultural like this, right? Because we have Argentina, we have Uruguay with important exports to Brazil, duty-free exports, right? And so look at the region. There are lots of opportunities, but then you have to give up something. And it's not China the threat. I think the threat is in our own mindset, because we only want to get something. We don't want to give something.
I mean, I'm just thinking, one of the major projects that Canada announced last week, I should say, was a copper mine, for example. You're talking about dramatically increasing all of this infrastructure on the west coast of South America, having better ports, faster shipping to China. And of course, it's it is the world's major producer of copper. So would that not surely in some way have an effect on China perhaps turning to new suppliers and turning away from North American suppliers?
So copper, like a lot of these commodities, they have global prices, and they have global sources and global markets. And so, I think countries need to do what they feel is right. So if you look at the motivations, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative for much the same reasons as in the 19th century the British funded railroads in Argentina and why they built the Trans-Pacific Railroad in Canada. And the reason is because it facilitates access to markets. It allows goods to move more easily, more cheaply, and that's good for China's market, for their access to markets in Latin America and elsewhere. And that's something which Latin American countries will need to figure out how they want to deal with, whether through tariffs or whether they want to have free trade. And invariably, they are looking in Latin America for export markets, and that means looking for port infrastructure, looking for railways, looking for things of that nature. And if they find that China is the partner of choice, then they're going to go with partner of choice. And so it's not for Canada to stand back and say, you shouldn't do this. It's for Canada to figure out how to get in the game. And so if you think about Chilean natural gas, for example. So Chile imports 42% of its natural gas from the United States. So that means it comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, goes down through the Panama Canal, into the Pacific, down. Canada just opened its first liquefied natural gas export terminal in the middle of this year. And so you're starting to have shipments go to Asia. You have the Haisla people near Kitimat who are putting in a $2 billion floating LNG terminal. You have discussions on LNG Canada 2, as they call it. Canada could, if it went after it, significantly displace U.S. natural gas in Chile. And so that's something that Canada needs to decide whether it wants to do. It's spending a lot of time exporting natural gas to Asia, which is great because the markets are growing. And if they can, I did a study a couple of years ago that said that if you could displace just 20% of the coal-fired power plants in Asia, you could save the equivalent of all of Canada's carbon emissions for a year. So you think about that. If you displace 20% of the coal-fired power plants, you get one Canada. You do 40%, you get two Canadas. And so that's something that Canada needs to decide to do. But at the same time, it also needs to look at these markets in Latin America and say, why is it that the U.S. is able to succeed shipping all that circuitous route when Canada could just put an LNG tanker and send it down the Pacific coast? And so that's what Canada has to decide to do, because in the game of nations, there's competition. And you know, part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow in the paper with the Canadian Council for the Americas are strategies for Canada to succeed in global trade with Latin America.
And Claudia and Tatiana, this question is about Brazil. I guess it's specifically about agriculture, really. How is Brazil handling its relationships with China and other Asian countries? I mean, the Brazilian soybean industry began partly because of Japanese investment, right? And Japanese, what is happening today, and are there any lessons in there for Canada?
Claudia, would you like to comment, or do you want me to comment?
No, I think you can start because you're much more knowledge on agriculture than me. Then I complement with my observations in other areas.
We know each other. We're friends for many, many years, so we can, decide who talks. Japan was really important for the Brazilian agricultural revolution and for the grains production, specifically in the Cerrado region, the central region, and now moving to Mato Piba, the north of the country, the new frontier, where Brazil produces corn and soybeans as a second harvest, in the Cerrado as a second harvest, and there as well in this new region. So Japan is investing there. There are many projects, and also Japan is investing across agriculture in general, animal health companies in Brazil, and many other sectors. because it's a matter of food security for Japan. Today, Claire was talking a lot about food security, right? And there are not so many territorial countries in the world anymore that have legally permitted arable land to produce agricultural products. The Economist published a few years ago some data saying that 80% of the countries in the world are net importers of food. 80%. And Japan, the Middle East, Africa, they are all, and East Asia specifically, right? They are all food-dependent countries, and Brazil has the largest reserves of arable land that are legally permitted for agricultural production. Only uses, I think, 66% for agricultural production right now of its territory. It's the 5th largest territory in the world, right? So many countries rely on Brazil. That's why this decoupling is not possible for many things, including food, right? Today, I think it was also Claire, I'm sorry, I'm quoting you all the time, was mentioning water and other natural resources. But yes, the world of today is a dispute over agriculture, over resources, natural resources, right? Either rare earths, critical minerals, energy, water, land. Land is extremely important. Look at China's land, degraded completely, right? 125 million hectares, right? And they don't have any more land to produce anything there, right? It's becoming a desert. So it's this. The countries are dependent on Brazil, on Canada, on Russia in this distribution. When you see the world distribution of land and other natural resources, so Latin America and Canada will always be strategic. Why don't they partner on this, right? Thank you.
Claudia, your thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, I think when you look at the potential of Brazil, it is not only agriculture, but in the areas of biofuels, the bioeconomy, the potential is huge. And I think, Tatiana, just correcting, I think Brazil has 60% of its territory with native forests. The percentage of the territory that is dedicated to agriculture is much smaller.
You're right, 23%, right? Sorry.
Yes, yes. And the Brazilian government has launched a program to recover 40 million hectares of degraded pasture to convert it to agriculture, arable land, and to be able to increase its agricultural production and also all this area of biofuels without cutting any tree. To give an idea of what 40 million hectares mean, the current area that Brazil dedicates to agriculture, just agriculture, not livestock, is 61 million hectares. So Brazil would increase for more than 50% its arable land if it recovers these 40 million hectares in the next 10 years. And just to complement, how Brazil sees the relationship with China and Asia as a whole, I think in the case of China, I think Brazil sees the relationship more through the lenses of opportunity than through the lenses of threat. There are sectors of the Brazilian economy that are concerned with Chinese competition, especially some sectors in the industry, but I think in general, the perception is more positive. Brazil is a country that have a very low rate of investments, very low rate of savings, and Brazilian investment as a percentage of GDP is about 16%, which is extremely low. So Brazil needs foreign capital, needs foreign investments to grow its capacity, this production capacity. And in the case of Japan, as Tatiana said, Brazil has historical ties with Japan. Brazil has the largest Japanese community outside Japan. This year, we celebrated 113 years of Japanese immigration to Brazil. And Japan last year was the 10th largest destination of Brazilian exports, followed by South Korea and India. And when we look in terms of diplomatic engagement, President Lula visited Japan in March and proposed the negotiation of a free trade agreement between Japan and Mercosur, which is the bloc that congregates Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And in July, after the BRICS summit in Brazil, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, made an official visit to the country and went to Brasilia. And besides China, Japan and South Korea and India are also significant investors in Brazil, especially Japan and South Korea that have investments in areas such as automotive, electronics, mining, technology, and agri-industry. And regarding Canada, Canada is also an important investor in Brazil with many projects in mining. And I think the two countries have a lot of opportunities to cooperate and to do business in critical minerals. It's something, an area where the Brazilian government is looking more and more. And I think there is a great potential for cooperation between Brazil and Canada.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up with a question about Canada. And I know you have to be somewhere, Eric, so we'll keep it short, but I'm going to come to you. What should or could Canada do in response to these closening, or this relationship, this burgeoning relationship between China and Latin America? Should it just sit back and watch? Is there anything to worry about? Should it respond in any way?
So my sense is that Canada should focus on advancing Canada's trade with the world, including with Latin America. And so, China is going to do what it's going to do. It needs, as Tatiana pointed out, it's huge land degradation in China, huge need for food imports. China is also looking to grow access to markets so that its consumer goods can find a home. The Central Committee has redoubled its stated goal of being an export-oriented economy, and that means it needs markets. And so the real question to ask is not, how do we feel about that? Is that a threat or an opportunity or whatever? The threat is, what are you going to do to make Canada stronger? Mm-hmm. And so this is fundamentally where we need to go, which is new strategies on engaging in trade. So we have 20th century strategies that we've done that have been built around trade missions and signing trade agreements and not really following up on them. But Canada needs a series of strategies to grow its exports. And so China's going to do what China's going to do. And the U.S. is going to do what the U.S. is going to do. And the European Union is going to do what they're going to do. And Brazil, as an intra-regional trader, is going to get closer to Mexico, maybe. And you're going to see these different sorts of arrangements. But the question is, how do you find a way as Canada to get deeper into friendships, supply chains, partnerships, et cetera, with all of these different jurisdictions? I mean, Canada should be trading a lot more with Brazil. And over the years, with complexities around beef and aircraft and so on, the relationship has not reached the potential that it could. And so the question is, how do we make sure that the next 15 years are better than the last 15 years when it comes to trade growth? And so to me, the answer is not what everybody else is doing. It's what are you going to do?
All right, that's great. Thanks very much. Thank you to Claudia for joining us from Brazil. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Eric, for that discussion.